This is The Civil Fleet, the podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In today's episode, we are speaking with Diane Taylor, a journalist with The Guardian newspaper, about a couple of different articles that she has written that are focused on the British government's migration policies, the new policies that they want to set into motion, as well as the one-in, one-out deal they have signed with France. So do check out the show notes to check out these articles that we're speaking about, and we'll have some updates in there too. All right. Before we get on with today's episode, I'd like to remind you that The Civil Fleet is not just a podcast, it's also a news blog with interviews, investigative stories, and all kinds of stuff. So go to civilfleet.com for more on that. And if you like what The Civil Fleet is doing, then you can help us to keep the lights on, to help us to continue to platform the amazing people that we have had on this podcast in a couple of ways. You can share us around on social media. You can tell your friends about us. You can give us ratings on podcast apps, on Spotify, on Apple Play, on all those kind of things. And you can chuck us some money. You can help us to pay for the web hosting and all this stuff that we have to pay for, which is admittedly very low. But you can help us do that if you like by going to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. And on there, you can sign up to make a one-off donation or a monthly donation, or whatever you like. And you'll also get access to a bonus episode on there too. So that is ko-fi.com/civilfleet. All right, let's get on with the show. Okay, and Diane Taylor, thank you very, very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So you are a journalist with The Guardian newspaper. I'm not actually sure what your title is. You just said before we started recording, I know more about your work than you do, but I didn't actually get a list of your job title. But yes, before we get going, we're going to talk about labour, and we're going to talk about some refugees or asylum seekers that you've spoken to recently in France. We'll talk about the one-in, one-out deal and all this kind of stuff between England and France. But before we get into all of that, could you give us a bit of background about yourself, Diane, and tell us how, maybe how you became a journalist, how did you get involved in writing about immigration issues and this kind of thing?
Well, as a young child, I was an avid reader and writer of fairy stories, and I remember doing little sort of quasi-Hollywood film scripts that I forced my friends in the playground to act out. And I always just wanted to be a sort of fiction writer. And then I think I was about 12 or 13, and I was reading my parents' daily newspaper. I remember it very clearly. I was just sitting on the floor in the lounge, and it was a very sunny afternoon, and the sun was streaming through the window. And I remember reading this article, I can't remember what the article was, on the front page of this newspaper, and thinking, how do I know if what I'm reading is the truth? And then I realised I don't know, and the only way to get at least one step nearer to the truth, even if it isn't totally the truth, is to become a journalist. So in that moment, I abandoned all novelist plans and focused after that on trying to become a journalist. So it was quite a distinct moment in my life when it happened. I didn't sort of just drift into it or whatever.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was about 13, 14 when I thought about doing it. I remember I used to watch the news, the BBC News on my mum. I remember watching, at the time it must have been Kosovo. It was the late 90s. I was in school. I think it was Kosovo conflict, or maybe it was Bosnia. It would have been a bit before. But I remember at the time thinking, I want to do this. But I just thought I would never be able to do it. It took me a long time before I realised, actually, I can do this.
Yeah.
And then how did you get involved in... Because it looks to me that you focus on immigration, human rights, and this kind of thing in the UK. How did you get involved in that? What was it that got you interested in reporting on those topics?
I mean, I don't think that was quite as much of a sort of light bulb moment as the decision to try and pursue journalism. I guess I'd always been interested in trying to highlight injustice, not necessarily just on migration issues, but more generally, I've probably spent a lot of my life feeling really angry about things that I think are wrong. So journalism is one way to sort of channel that anger. But I've always sort of written about people on the margins, not the sort of captains of industry types.
Yeah, I personally always find when I'm going to interview someone, I find it really more exciting when I'm not just for the podcast but for my job. I find it really interesting when I'm going to interview someone who's an activist or someone been on the brunt end of injustice or something, rather than like a captain of industry, like you said. I find that much more motivating.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the point about the truth. I always think the truth is at the bottom of the sort of society's pile, and the further up the greasy pole people move, the less truthful they tend to become. Obviously not always, but it can be the case. Whereas I always feel people who are, as I say, in the eyes of society at the bottom of one pecking order or another, tend to be very truthful people.
That's really interesting. I think I agree. That's a great observation. I think I agree with that. So do you think that's kind of like a motivator for you in terms of your journalism, is like trying to get these people at the bottom who can talk about and expose what's happening to them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think those people get a huge amount of representation in the media. I mean, there's not a nanosecond that goes by without hearing what falls out of Nigel Farage or Keir Starmer or Robert Jenrick's mouth. But they're not 99.9% of the world, are they? They talk a lot, but they're not the whole world.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that have to bear the brunt of the things that they say and do, right? And I always find that motivating to get those stories out there. So let's we're going to talk about some articles that you've done. Mostly, I think we'll focus on one that you did about people who had just been, I think it was an Iranian person, maybe Eritreans and Syrians that were forced out of the UK back to France after they'd crossed here. But before we get into that, can you give us some background detail on what this one in, one out deal is? I think actually that a lot of our listeners to this podcast will know this, but I know we have a lot of listeners in Europe, in Germany in particular, so they might not know about this deal. So could you give us a bit of a background into it?
Yeah, sure. So since about 2018, when asylum-seekers started crossing the channel in small boats, successive governments have obsessed about stopping people coming in small boats. People used to come before that in the backs of lorries or hanging on the roof or the underside of Eurostar trains or all kinds of other ways, and very highly dangerous ways, very, very high death rates. And the government successive governments didn't particularly care about that because nobody really saw them. There weren't many photo opportunities from people spilling out of the backs of lorries, whereas an overcrowded dinghy with a blue horizon, lapping waves, orange life jackets, perfect photo opportunity. So successive governments have focused unsuccessfully on trying to stop people coming in small boats, and they've tried various things like Rwanda, which was strangled at birth, and various other things which don't seem to have dented the numbers. And this latest thing, which was finalised in August of this year, called or nicknamed One In, One Out. But the idea is that because a small number of people coming in small boats will be sent back to France, whether they like it or not, they don't have a choice. The idea is that will act as a disincentive for people to cross the channel. So far it hasn't. Time will tell if that will change. I mean, obviously the government has announced a raft of quite draconian immigration measures that they also hope will stop people coming here. The country could end up quite empty, couldn't it? I think net migration has fallen quite dramatically, and I think the figures that are due out tomorrow will show a further fall in net migration. So, but anyway, the government is still focused, even if net migration fell to zero, but there was still a few thousand people coming on small boats. The government would throw everything at stopping the boats because they see that the visuals and the optics of that is very politically damaging, and that applies to all governments who've been in power in recent years anyway. So so this is kind of the latest. It's a bit of a stunt really, because it's very, very small numbers. I think so far just over 100 people have been sent back to France under the deal, and under 100 have come to the UK. So you can get 1,000 people crossing in small boats on a good weather day, or more than 1,000. So it's really, in terms of actual numbers, it's a drop in the ocean, but the government thinks it's showing that they mean business about booting people out.
Yeah, and like the last few years, the focus on the small boats crossing it just seems to get increased, bigger and bigger. I imagine that I think one of the previous governments, I can't remember which now, one of the Tory governments before, they used it as a way to kind of maybe curry favour with voters to say we can be tough on these people coming in. But now it feels like it's a rod for every government's back as they continuously use this, but they never seem to be able to stop it no matter what they do.
No, I mean, I think, in my opinion, successive governments have looked at the issue through the wrong end of the telescope. They're looking at it from, the end of the telescope that they think is what voters want a government to deliver on. Whereas if they looked at it from the other end, which is what are the motivations of asylum seekers and what makes them move and what might make them move differently, they might have more success, but they don't seem to take into consideration the sort of thought processes, choices that asylum seekers are forced to make. So I don't really see how they're ever going to resolve this issue if they're completely disregarding what is motivating asylum seekers and what the reality of their lives is.
Yeah, and I always find it interesting, the things that they come up with, which they always say, like we don't really need to get into this, but the government recently, the Labour government in this country recently trying to push ID cards again for citizens. I think many European countries already have these, but we don't have them in the UK. But one of the reasons for like this policy was because it'll get net migration down, or it'll get it'll stop illegal immigrants or something. But
very strange. Illegal immigrants will be dodging any ID cards that the government might roll out. So I don't really get that. But anyway, I'm sure you've been to Calais, and I went there many years ago, and I went to Bosnia last year, and I met. We're in a previous episode which people can listen to. I went to Bosnia with an activist group called No Name Kitchen, and I met lots of people on the move there. And I asked people that were going to Britain if they knew about the Rwanda scheme at the time, and they'd never heard of it. And so, like a lot of these
policies aren't really for the asylum seekers. It's for us. It's for voters, basically. It sounds good. It sounds tough, but is it going to work?
Yeah, I mean, as the Home Office's own research has shown that benefits are not a pull for asylum seekers because they come from countries where there's no traditional history of receiving benefits. So, the government keeps saying, we're not letting them come here and have benefits. They don't even know what benefits are, let alone being, attracted here by them. People who are resourceful enough to leave everything behind and then go on a very difficult, dangerous journey. The last thing they want is to sit here on benefits. They want to try and live. You can't really have a good life on benefits, can you?
And I think asylum, I don't remember what it is now, but last time I remember looking, I think asylum seekers get like around £40 like every 2 weeks or something. It's really low. Like, I don't know how you can afford to live on that at all.
If they're in the hotel getting 3 inedible meals a day, they get just under £10 a week. If they're in self-catering accommodation, they get just under £50 a week. So yeah, they're not going to be buying a Rolls Royce anytime soon.
No, yeah, absolutely not. And we've kind of touched on this, but say in the UK we have a new Home Secretary, which in Europe is often like the internal. I can't remember what they're called. Interior Minister.
Minister of the Interior, yeah.
And she's called Sabana Mahmood, and she's recently introduced a bunch of new policies. We don't need to go into all of these, just a few. I don't know if you could discuss what some of these are and what you think about these. You've got a really good opinion piece, which I'll link to in the show notes that people can read for more on this.
Thank you. Well, Shabana Mahmood's policies that she's announced in the last week or so fall into 2 categories. The first is irregular migration, which is a draconian set of measures aimed at asylum seekers and refugees. The main one being that they have to quadruple the time they have to wait before they can get indefinite leave to remain, which is very, very brutal. If you want to try and move forward with your life, you just can't if you're on, renewals and checks every 30 months, which is what she wants to introduce. There are some migrants who are already on what's called the 10-year route, where they have to renew every 30 months, and the Home Office checks if they can continue staying here. So that is going to be extended and doubled for refugees. It's all about punishing people, but obviously, even if you don't care about asylum seekers and refugees, it's highly damaging for social cohesion if you've got this sort of very large cohort of people who are outsiders and can't integrate, can't focus on moving forward because they've always got Shabana Mahmood checking up on them and breathing over their shoulders. So that's the irregular migration. Then there's the regular migration, and the Home Office has already halted care workers' visas, health and care workers' visas, which is massively, and it's getting stricter on student visas, which is massively reducing net migration. But now they're also targeting people who are already here and making things much more draconian for them. So, for example, the 10-year route that I mentioned, that's now become the 20-year route. And as well as the uncertainty on that 10-year that is now becoming 20-year route, it's very expensive. Every time you have to renew every 30 months, there's a cost of several £1,000s. And these are people, health and care workers, not nurses and doctors. They're exempted from these new rules, but they're the people who are holding the country together in many ways, the people who clean offices and underground stations through the night, porters, sort of other health care workers, people working in care homes, in schools, people who are sweeping the streets, people who are just keeping everything ticking over nicely for us, doing jobs that lots of English people turn their noses up at and don't want to do, working for a very low wage, often doing two jobs just to make ends meet and to pay the crippling immigration fees. And the Home Office uses these very high immigration fees that it charges to subsidise immigration enforcement, which is detaining people, sometimes restraining them, forcing them out of the country, etc. So it's quite an unhappy package of measures.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak system. Pretty bleak. There's a pretty bleak picture there, and there's been a lot of talk. Well, I certainly have seen a lot of people complain and talk about they're talking about copying, I guess you could say, the Danish model, where they might take away people's possessions and jewellery, but people I've met that have been on the move, the refugees, asylum seekers that I've met, they're not exactly covered in like diamonds and stuff. Like they might have a watch, and that's it. They might not even. They often don't even have a wallet. Like,
yeah, no, they're not. They don't. They don't. The people who. I mean, that's one of the stupid things about this scheme, that with irregular migration, there are different options that people can take depending on how much money they've got. So, for example, someone who was really wealthy, who had a good reason to flee and wanted to use the asylum route, but happened to have a lot of money, would be much more likely to pay for a false passport and arrive by plane rather than negotiating with a smuggler in Calais and getting on a dinghy where they may or may not survive to get to the other side of the channel. So it doesn't really compute as a coherent piece of policy. I mean, good luck to Shabana if she thinks she's gonna find loads of gold on dinghies. I don't think it exists.
Yeah, I don't know where that's going. And I don't actually know very much about the Danish system, but I remember when it came out and just thinking that's so cruel. But then, what are they actually expected to take? Like, can't be very much. So people don't have very much on them.
Apparently, there've only been 17 occasions since 2016 or something where they've confiscated anything, and I think it can be not just jewellery but anything of value. So it's obviously not been rolled out in Denmark in a big way.
Yeah, that's good. Well, yeah, I mean, it's terrible, but it's good that it's only been 17. It's like a handful of times.
Something like 17, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we'll move on in a second, but the ability to settle in the UK is going from 5 years. After 5 years, you can apply currently, but they want to change it to 20, like you said. That is so long. Like, what can you tell us a bit more about that? Like, how is it even going to be part? Like, I guess if people are here but they don't have settled status and they're out of work, then they don't have access to like benefits or anything at all for 20 years. It's just so incredibly such a long time.
Yeah, and if you've ever claimed benefits, you can be further punished, and I think they can extend it to 30 years or something like that, or if you've got any criminal conviction. And people can, most criminal convictions are not for rape or murder or something, and people can end up with a conviction either for something quite minor that they did do, or a conviction for something they didn't do, and that that can penalise them really for the rest of their lives. So it's very draconian, and I do think there's a difference between trying to deter people from coming who have not yet arrived, because at least then they can make some kind of informed decision. Not that a lot of people have a huge number of choices, but at least they can weigh up the pros and cons of whether to come here or not. But the people who are here, who've got leave to remain on the 10-year route, they're here, they're working, they're doing everything legally, they haven't committed any crimes, they're just helping British society. Why are we punishing them? That seems to me to be particularly egregious.
Yeah, and that's really egregious. I think I agree. Yeah, absolutely. So these, I don't think they've come into force yet. I don't know what's happening with these plans, but I guess they'll be coming in at some point. So I read an article like a couple of weeks ago, or last week I think it was, that you wrote, and it's called "No Safe Place to Go. People sent back to France under one in, one out deal tell of desperation." After I read it, I thought I've been wanting to contact you to come on the Civil Fleet podcast for a while, and so as soon as I saw this, I was like, this is my opportunity. I need someone to tell me about one in, one out. Let's get him on, and I'm so glad you've come on. Can you tell us about this article? I thought it was a really good read, and I'll have links to it in the show notes for people listening so they can read more.
Thanks. I mean, I always interviewed a lot of asylum seekers, and I've interviewed asylum seekers in northern France quite a bit over the years, and obviously a lot of asylum seekers in the UK. So I really continued doing that when One In, One Out was introduced, and I was speaking to asylum seekers who arrived on small boats and then were placed in detention centres here, and also speaking to people after they've been sent back from here to France. So that's how it kind of that's how the article happened, really. Obviously it's a new thing, so people are interested in how it's all panning out, and according to the asylum seekers who've been sent back to France, it's pretty disastrous from their point of view. So when we Brexited, we left the Dublin Convention, which is where EU countries can send asylum seekers who arrive on their doorsteps. They have a possibility. It's not guaranteed because the other country has to accept them, but they have a possibility of sending people back, asylum seekers back, to a different EU country that they passed through and were fingerprinted in prior to arriving in the second EU country or whatever it is. Nigel Farage, when he was pushing Brexit and talking about taking back control of our borders, somehow omitted to mention that leaving the Dublin Convention could give us less control than we'd had previously. So what's happened with this new one in, one out deal is that while the UK can no longer access this Dublin Treaty where they could move people around Europe, France is doing it for them. And quite a lot of people who have been sent back to France under one in, one out have received papers from the French authorities saying they're going to be sent out of France to the country where they were first, the EU country where they were first fingerprinted, and some of them, countries like Croatia, which have a very bad record of treatment of asylum seekers. People are worried that from Croatia, they might get sent back to their own country, which, might be put their life at risk. So it's all very scary and unsettling for people who are sent back. They seem to be moved around a lot, like parcels. So when they arrive, they're taken to a hotel. Then a few days later, they're taken to a sort of shelter in Paris near a railway station, and then they're moved to different types and levels of reception centres in different French cities, and then they're moved again and they get the Dublin papers. So the deal was advertised as France is a safe country, just sort your asylum out in France, but France doesn't see it in quite that way. So they are certainly implementing Dublin, and that is making people very frightened, and people don't feel secure in France. I mean, the two people who it's been reported came back to the UK after being sent to France had both been attacked in France in different circumstances, and so for them, France felt specifically very unsafe. So while the UK government is correct that France is a generally safe country, it's not necessarily safe for every single person who they send back there.
Yeah, because I think one person in the article said they were attacked by smugglers, and France is a safe country. It's not being bombed, or there's not. It's not like living in Libya or something, but it's not it might not be safe for individual people, right?
Yeah, it depends on individual circumstances, but the Home Office don't seem to be considering individual circumstances with the people they send back to France. They're determined, they've got their quota, they haven't told us what the quota is, but they've obviously got a fixed number of people they want to send back every week or every month or whatever, and they don't want, individual circumstances to get in the way of that. So people who've been trafficked, people who've been attacked, people who are victims of torture, people who are age disputed, but the Home Office says they're adults, they're all on the plane.
And then, do you know, the people that they send back, do they send them back before they lodge asylum claim, or how does that work?
So their claims, so they have their screening interview at Mastodon, which is the place where people are initially processed after they arrive on small boats. It's like a processing centre in Kent. And then most people who are now arriving on small boats are sent to hotels, but randomly a small number from each boat are detained, and there doesn't seem to be any particular merit or dismerit for why some people are picked and some people aren't picked. It just seems very random, which people understandably feel is very unjust. They say, I was sitting on the boat with someone from my country. We went through the same experience. He'll be getting a almost certainly positive decision on his asylum claim in the next few weeks, because the Home Office are speeding up processing claims from certain conflict zones, whereas me, I'm just going to be sent back to France. That's not fair. So that's what people are saying.
It feels quite brutal just to send people back there when they've got no connection. Maybe, I think one person in that article, I think it was the Syrian woman, she had a brother here. She's got an obvious and a genuine reason why she wants to get to this country.
Most of the people who I've interviewed, and I haven't interviewed everybody who's been sent back to France or detained for France, but most of the people I've interviewed have got a close relative in the UK, and that was why they wanted to come. And what do we want in life? We want to work and be with our families. Asylum-seekers don't want anything different.
Exactly.
It's just a universal human need and desire. But somehow, if you're an asylum seeker, you're not allowed to want or be entitled to the same things, because somehow being a victim of war makes you some kind of inferior category when it comes to rights.
Yeah, that's really sad. And I didn't really dawn on me until I read your article. Like, I hear about, you're probably familiar with this term, ping pong pushbacks, where people, like, it happens a lot, I think, in Greece and Turkey, Bosnia and Croatia, Poland and Belarus, and that's where people are pushed back from one border to another continuously. And I think there's been people that in Poland or Lithuania, I've done a podcast with groups in Lithuania and Poland, and I don't remember which one, but there's been people dying at the borders, and because they've been stuck in like no man's land. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's anywhere near that bad here, but it does feel like that could happen, because I don't remember if it was Afran or someone else in your article, and we should say that Afran's not their real name. Like, they're planning to come back, and it just terribly sad, I think, to have people like get sent to France where they won't know anything. It might not know anything about France. There might have problems there. Might have been abused by the police or whoever, like gangster smugglers, etc. There, and then they're going to be. There's a potential like to be ping pong back and forth. It's just an awful situation to be in.
I mean, I think, generally with refugees, they flee a difficult situation, and they have a difficult journey, but they see an end in sight. They have a goal and a focus, and for a small number that focus is getting to the UK. This scheme has kind of completely changed that, because people really have nowhere. They don't have a plan, because they think it's unlikely they'll be able to stay in France. UK's thrown them out. What should they focus on? They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. So it's a new variety of punishment for refugees that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, it's really like limbo, basically. Just to be stuck going between the two countries for a long time. It'd be an awful situation to be in.
And what are the long-term implications of having huge numbers of people in limbo, not allowed to join society, just as some kind of invisible underclass? Even if you don't care about what's happening to those people, what are the broader implications for European society? Not good at all.
Yeah, and it can imagine if you're stuck in that situation. The only way, one of the few ways you can get money is through crime, basically. And that I feel like this kind of situation when you make people, you leave people in limbo.
You're driving people into things they don't want to be driven into. For sure. Yeah. And
then you just did this article today, so we're recording late on November the 26th. It's Wednesday. We should wrap this up soon. But you just written an article today called "Labour's Asylum Plans Are Horribly Cruel." No, that's the wrong title. Where did I get the title? Can you remember the title of this article? I've got it here somewhere. Asylum-seekers in UK go on hunger strike over one in, one out removals. So it kind of speaks for itself, but yeah, can you tell us about that? I think this is a really important issue.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly the first hunger strike that has happened in relation to one in, one out. And it's quite a few years. I would need to check the facts exactly, but it's certainly some time since there has been a sort of mass hunger strike in detention. I mean, you might get one person doing an individual hunger strike for their particular individual reasons, but to have quite a large number, I think is significant. And as I said, it's the first sort of mass protest against one in, one out. Many of those who are on hunger strike will be on the plane tomorrow morning to France. but they decided they want to make their voices heard. I think one point to make about this particular hunger strike that might be different from other hunger strikes in detention is quite often when people are detained, they've been in the UK for some time, so they're usually in reasonably good health, reasonably well nourished. This cohort of people, they've been living in very difficult circumstances in northern France, often underfed, undernourished, multiple health problems, and then they've had a nightmarish journey on the boat across the channel, and then bang, straight into detention. And so their health is already pretty poor, and they're likely to be undernourished. And this is the group that are going on hunger strike. So, some of the people who've been detained are age-disputed young people, and I was told that one person who's been detained, who's age-disputed, was having an interview with the local authority yesterday for an age assessment and fainted during the age assessment. He's one of the hunger strikers, but that's an indication that, you know, people's starting point for this hunger strike is not robust health.
That's a good point. I'd not thought of that. But yeah, obviously these people have probably not been fed very well for the last, well, I don't know, they could have been on, who knows how long they've been travelling for. But yeah, that's quite shocking, isn't it? And I think, do you know, like, is it like about 30 people at the moment that have, as of...
I've heard sort of various different estimates. I think it's hard to be absolutely clear, but it's somewhere around 30. I don't know because we don't go into detention centres, so I don't know exactly. But that seems to be the consensus from the detainees themselves and the NGOs working with them.
Do you know which? I think in the article you got a quote from Bail for Immigration Detainees, and is there, because by the time we publish this will have moved on. So I'll have links to the latest, whatever the latest stories is when I publish this article. But are there any groups like there's BID? Was there any other groups that we could look at that are covering this, that people could check out?
I think Humans for Rights Network are also supporting some of the hunger strikers. I think possibly Jesuit Refugee Service, but I mean, you would probably need to double check that.
Yeah, I'll look at those, and then we can have links, and anyone listening should go check out those groups. And I should probably get them on the podcast. Definitely Humans for Rights Network. I've been in touch with them a few times, but I've never had them on the podcast, but we should get them on. So, and there was like something I wanted to mention that you mentioned in your piece. Like, I often feel like this is my last question. I think, Diane, was there anything I've got a question that I've got in my mind? Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before I move to the end here of the podcast?
No, I'm sure I said more than enough.
It's been really great, and it's really late, so we should end this now. But let me just say, like, at the end of the podcast, I asked people how they're feeling about the future, and where they think things are going in terms of refugees and people on the move and this kind of thing. I thought it feels pretty grim to me, and it was quite scary that when Shabana Mahmood put out these policies, or when they first came to light, it figures like Tommy Robinson, who's a far-right activist in this country, boasting that the Overton window has been obliterated, and people are more basically saying people are more accepted of cruel treatment of refugees, is what he was saying. So it feels really bleak to me. How do you feel, and do you share my bleak sense? Or I always like it.
I'm afraid I do. I can't really. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Things can change. You know, when Alan Kurdi, the little Syrian boy, was washed up on the beach in Turkey, there was a huge outpouring of sort of solidarity, sympathy, support for refugees. Just, that little boy symbolised sort of the difficult journeys and difficult lives that refugees have. But things have changed hugely since then. But who knows? Maybe things. We have to hope, don't we? Hope dies last, as Studs Terkel said. So we have to hope that there will be a kinder, a more supportive environment going forward. But I don't think it's going to be happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I often say on this podcast, I always find hope in the activist groups and the people, the charities and things that are standing up for these people and standing up for people on the move and trying to right the wrongs. That's where I always find some optimism. But I wonder if journalists are maybe just depressing people in general.
No, definitely. We are depressing people, but I think when I interview asylum seekers and refugees, that they are very, the ones I've interviewed anyway. Obviously, I haven't spoken to everybody, but the ones I've interviewed have been very inspirational people. As I say, it's not easy. It's not easy to leave home, leave everything, and escape to safety. It's not an easy thing to do.
You must have, to actually just go on that journey. I think you must already have some kind of hope and optimism to even take on that journey. I think, to be able to go from Afghanistan or somewhere.
Absolutely.
All right, well, Diane, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for speaking to this late in the evening. And and I'll have links to your article so people can find you and find your social media if you use it and this kind of thing. All right, thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
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 Okay, that was episode 83 of the Civil Fleet podcast. Thank you very, very much for listening. Thanks again to Diane Taylor for coming on the podcast and talking to us and spending her time with us. Cheers, Diane. That was really appreciated. Okay, at the end of the podcast, I like to tell you to go check out the blog. Go to civilfleet.com and you'll find some news stories on there. You can find some investigative reports and some interviews on there also. So check out civilfleet.com. Also, you can help the Civil Fleet. You can help us to continue to platform the amazing people that we have had on this podcast by doing a couple of things. You can share us around on social media. You can tell your friends about us. You can give us ratings on podcast apps. And if you're really, really kind and you really want to help us to continue to platform the amazing people on this podcast, then you can chuck us some money. You can go to ko-fi.com/civilfleet. And on there, you can sign up, make a one-off donation or a monthly donation. And you'll also get access to a bonus episode on there too. Hopefully we'll get some more bonus episodes on there eventually also. But in the time being, we've just got the one. So if you go to ko-fi.com/civilfleets, then you can sign up there. All right, we have another episode in the works. I'm going to work on that one almost straight after this. So yeah, keep an eye on your podcast feeds and I'll see you later. Cheers, bye-bye.